Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Prodigy from Kilo23. Today we're checking out more parts from AirsoftPeak.com and finishing up this build on my MP5. This is the third of 3 parts. Today we'll be checking out a couple more parts, so keep watching. Now we are still covering a company called Energy, and all these parts are coming from AirsoftPeak.com. I'll put links in the description so you can check out all these parts and more if you want to. Energy makes a lot of parts. We've already covered their gearbox shell, piston, and their piston head. So today we're checking out their metal bearing spring guide. And I'll be comparing these parts to the stock parts as well that would usually come in an airsoft gun. And we're checking out their aluminum cylinder head. And this guy has 2 O-rings and it seems like it's pretty well built. So I'll be installing these in the gun today and seeing if there's any modifications to the gun or the gearbox, the parts, anything that needs to be done. Then I'll finish up the build and I'll give you guys some tricks on how to get this all to work together and the issues I have or may have, things like that. And we'll get it all put together and we'll see how it shoots. Now since our last video, I've gone ahead and installed quite a few of the parts that are going to be in the gearbox aside from the ones we're upgrading and installing. Went ahead and got the trigger and wiring assembly installed, all the bushings, I had the gears shimmed and everything like that. A couple of parts were not quite compatible from the Echo 1 MP5 to this gun, so I had to swap some parts out, but everything seems to be pretty functional now. One thing I did have to modify slightly was the selector plate here. The rails were a little bit too high to fit into the grooves here, so I actually had to take a metal file and shave them down a little bit. Not that big of a deal, pretty simple to do. Also, the selector plate was intended for 7mm bushings, so the troughs and the other side of this were not really big enough, so I had to sand those down as well for the 8mm bushings to fit well on this. Now our 2 cylinder heads are actually pretty different. Normally I have a sorbothane pad adhered to this, and that's my kind of standard upgrade. So I went ahead and removed that, and you see a little bit of glue residue here. Normally these are going to have a rubber damper here, and those tend to work alright. The one on this one's a little thin. It is made of just a regular old plastic, and it does have 1 single O-ring. So it's kind of a standard part, really. Once we upgrade to the Energy cylinder head here, you actually get a full aluminum construction. Now this does make it a little bit heavier, so it can put a little bit more wear on your gearbox shell, but not a whole lot more. As long as it's not like a full steel design and it's lighter aluminum, then you're set to go there. I did also notice I had to drill these holes out just a little bit. The Energy gearbox shell actually did not fit this cylinder head very well, so I had to Dremel those out a little bit so that it would fit this cylinder head a little bit better. Now normally our cylinder head is just going to fit into the front here. This is the original one. As you can see, I have a port here for the MP5 length barrel, and this is the original cylinder that came in the gun. I'm just going to pop this out here. This one still gets a pretty good air seal. And we're just going to go ahead and install this one. It sits here in here pretty snugly. Now if you really want, I don't find it necessary. You can actually put Teflon tape around the 2 O-rings here between that and the cylinder, and that can potentially seal up any air leaks you may have, but I don't believe I'm going to have any with this one. It sits very snugly in there. It seems to fit really, really nicely. Now you always want to check and make sure your nozzle is probably going to get a good air seal. This one's just the stock plastic nozzle. I chose not to upgrade to a new nozzle. Sometimes you have some length issues, and those are just kind of a pain to mess with, so I stuck with the original nozzle. I'm not looking for a super amazing air seal. I want to just make sure it feeds well and it shoots well. And it seemed like the best way to do that. So original nozzle, a little bit of grease in there, should get a pretty decent air seal. It rocks around quite a bit. It doesn't have a O-ring on the inside of it, so it'll get a good air seal, but not a perfect air seal. Now later on in the video, after I'm completed the installation of the cylinder head and the aluminum spring guide, we'll be checking to see if the angle of engagement needs correcting, and I'm pretty sure it will, and I'll probably be installing a sorbothane pad on the cylinder head. Now from my parts collection, I pulled out 2 different spring guides. Either of these could pretty easily come in your gun. I believe this is from a G&G combat machine. This is probably from a random JG. The spring guide that actually came in this gun was already a metal bearing spring guide, but this one is actually intended for a version 3 gearbox, so it wasn't compatible with this new Energy gearbox. So I'm going to set that one aside. But your standard spring guide is probably going to be plastic. It's not going to have any bearings. It might have a washer down here, which is probably about it. I've actually had these break before because they do have these little plastic pegs on the side, and those actually tend to go first. Sometimes your base can separate from your shaft, and that's also bad. Your metal one is going to be, well, it'll probably last a long, long time. You rarely have issues with these. Obviously, metal, it's not like plastic. It probably won't break from the base, or your little pegs here won't go. These still don't have any washers or bearings, so kind of the same problem there. It does not allow your spring to twist at all when it's moving. Now our new energy spring guide, actually, the base is connected to the shaft here, so the spring and the shaft sit on the same part here. This one fits a little tightly, so you notice the shaft and the base here spin with the spring, so that's kind of nice. And it's got bearings under here, and it's got a metal base as well, so you're all set to go there. I think this is a great addition to the gun. Now to check our angle of engagement, we've got the cylinder, cylinder head, piston, and piston head installed along with the sector gear. Now you can see that the angle that this gear really hits it is not that amazing, so I'm probably going to end up shaving down the second to last tooth on the piston, as well as a little bit of the third to last tooth to make sure. Also, I'll probably install a washer or something along those lines, probably a sorbethane pad in there to help correct the angle of engagement, just to push the piston and the piston head back a little bit. So the angle of engagement between the first tooth on the sector gear and the first tooth on the piston is pretty much the same. Now, after installing a sorbethane pad on the cylinder head and a small washer on the back of the piston head there, slide it into place here and we can check the angle of engagement. I also shaved down the second to last tooth there. You can see it's quite a bit better. Not dead on perfect. I think I'm going to just leave it here, but it's not hitting any teeth there before the last tooth, so that's a good thing. And it's pretty dang close there, so I think I'm all set. Alright, now I've got everything tuned, greased, and all the good stuff. We got the tappet plate greased, piston head, gears, gear shafts, anything that really needs lubrication. Now this is the unusual part. Being a quick change spring, I did not install the spring in the spring guide when I closed the gearbox. So I'm going to go ahead and slide those in now. And it's a little bit of a longer spring, this being I believe it's a Modify M90, a little bit lower power, but it's still pretty long. You actually want to take your spring guide, sit it in here, and this is the tough part I've found. Just slide it in here. After that screw is in there, you do want to screw this down. Alright, with that finished, our gearbox is closed up. I can go ahead and install it in the lower receiver, put the motor in, adjust the motor height, and we'll see how it shoots. Now, as I was installing the gearbox into the lower, you'll notice these screw holes are a little bit wider than they were. I actually had to drill them out a little bit because these screw holes in the lower gearbox, for those the gearbox screws into the lower, are actually a little bit too wide by about 1 or 2 millimeters, so I did have to enlarge those holes just a little bit. Alright, with everything finished, I'm going to go ahead and hook up an 11.1 LiPo here and give it a go. Got it on semi first. And some full auto. Now we'll be chronoing with 0.2 gram rounds on a 7.4 volt LiPo. That is excellent. We're hitting just within about 2 FPS at the most every shot, getting about 12 rounds a second on a 7.4 volt LiPo. Alright, I was actually pretty surprised I was getting about 335 to 340 roughly with an M90 spring. That's actually really good. This is getting a great air seal. I love the way it sounds. The rate of fire isn't amazing, but that's because the stock motor that's in here is more of a torque motor. So the rate of fire isn't super high, but it can pull a really hard spring. I did put an 11.1 on there, and it actually overspins the motor quite a bit. I was getting a very consistent 2-round burst on semi-auto, which I don't exactly like. That's great if you have a Fed or something, but if you're doing it to standard, I'm not a fan. Now, just like any build like this, you're going to have some issues putting your new gearbox in, putting some parts in. Things might need some modification to some extent. Something I did not realize was that the gearbox on top here was flattened down quite a bit. And the ridge that actually was on the energy gearbox didn't exactly mesh very well when I put everything back together. So that being said, I did have to take the energy gearbox and file a little bit off the top. It wasn't too much, but the main thing I had to modify was the bolt here, or the fake bolt more like. Just the bottom here did not mesh very well at all with the top of the gearbox, so I had to file the heck out of the bottom of this to get it to fit well. Other than that, it fits great in this gun. I had no issues as far as the gearbox installation itself, aside from it not fitting very well in a couple of the sections of this gun. Now that is mainly because of the gearbox, this particular gun needing a slight modification to a gearbox. Otherwise it's going to fit fine in any M4, M16, anything that really needs a version 2 gearbox. Alright, that's about it for today. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm ASTKilo23. Again, big thanks to AirsoftPeak.com for letting me check out all these cool parts. It's always a lot of fun putting these builds together, checking out new parts, seeing what's out there. Of course, I've got links in the description for all of these parts, so you can go to AirsoftPeak.com and order them for yourself. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm ASTKilo23. Also, be sure to check out my Facebook page. I got a link to that in the description as well. Thanks for watching, guys, and take it easy.